everyone, and thank you for joining us on Saturday morning for the briefing. As a mother of a 1-year-old, I know how valuable those extra hours of weekend sleep can be, and I'm very grateful to all of you who are tuning in today, and I will do my best to make it worth your time. To introduce myself to those who don't know me, I am the current president of League of Women Voters of Chicago. Earlier this year, I applied to be a league delegate to the 68th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, CSW for short. For those of you who haven't seen these sort of listings, the National League in their newsletters will put out calls for volunteers of league members to participate in these sort of things, and I thought it would be fun to kind of try something new and different. I will say before I get started that despite being a native New Yorker born and raised on the island of Manhattan, I'd never been inside the United Nations before this year, and now I cannot stop talking about it. I don't know if anyone else on this call has ever been inside, but it is one of the grooviest places I have ever been. Like, I took an architecture tour and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is kind of like my dream house. Just with the design of it. It's pretty wild also to see like when it was designed versus in the post 9/11 world, like how much has been kind of closed off security wise. Like you used to just like be able to drop your kids off at like the park outside and like pick them up later. Like really, really wild back when it was founded. I learned a lot of really great stuff at this conference, and I'm excited this morning to share some of what I learned and some of how I participated. And also, this is kind of a very interesting aspect of league life that I certainly didn't know a lot about, and I'm excited to share that with everyone. And with that being said, let's dive right in. To begin, let's talk about what the CSW is, why it exists, and what it does. The United Nations Commission on the Status of Women was established in 1946, in the earliest days of the UN's history as a functional commission of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. ECO, SOC, it's sort of how you often see that council abbreviated. The CSW was given a mandate to advance women's rights and gender equality worldwide. At its founding, the CSW consisted of representatives of 15 governments. Remarkably, all 15 of the original representatives were women, a somewhat shocking fact given the state of gender equality in 1940s diplomacy. To this day, women always make up a majority of CSW delegates. As you can see in the upper image on the slide, which shows the signing of the UN Charter, women weren't generally in the room where things were happening. The founding representatives of CSW were committed to changing that. At the first meeting of the CSW in 1947, its members committed, and this is the quote, to raise the status of women irrespective of nationality, race, language, or religion, to equality with men in all fields of human enterprise, and to eliminate all discrimination against women in the provisions of statutory law, in legal maxims or rules, or in interpretation of customary law. That lofty goal has continued to drive CSW's activities to the present day. The CSW has grown over the decades. The commission now consists of one representative from each of the 45 member states elected by the council to 4-year terms. The CSW also includes non-state civil society organizations. Civil society can be understood as the third sector of society, distinct from government and business. Civil society encompasses the wide array of non-governmental and nonprofit organizations that have a presence in public life, expressing the interests and values of their members or others based on ethical, cultural, political, scientific, religious, or philanthropic considerations. In the context of the United Nations, that usually means NGOs such as the League. What the CSW does. The CSW has a few primary mission objectives: promote gender equality, The CSW aims to ensure full and equal participation of women in political, economic, and social spheres. Review progress. It monitors and assesses the progress made towards achieving gender equality and the implementation of international standards like the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Recommend policy. It develops policy recommendations that address issues affecting women and provides guidance to UN member states on how to implement them. Advocate and raise awareness. It raises awareness about the challenges faced by women globally and advocates for the adoption of policies that protect women's rights and ensure their full participation in society. All of the CSW's activities are closely tied to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, better known as the SDGs. I have those behind me because I've become a bit of a nerd for it. You can see the logo for the SDGs on the slide, which as an artist by training and an occasional graphic artist by trade, I absolutely love. I have a bunch of pins on all my jackets and blazers with the logo as well. So what are the SDGs? They are a set of 17 global objectives set by the UN in 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The SDGs aim to address the world's most pressing challenges such as poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, and peace and justice. Each goal encompasses specific targets and indicators to monitor progress and guide international efforts towards a more sustainable and equitable future. The SDGs represent a universal call to action, uniting governments, businesses, civil society, and individuals in a shared effort to achieve a better world by 2030. The CSW is obviously focused on the gender equality SDG first and foremost, but its work overlaps with many of the other goals. That is not too surprising when one thinks how intertwined the cause of women's rights is with every aspect of social, economic, and spiritual development. Now we get to the CSW and the League of Women Voters. Now you might be wondering, what does all of this have to do with the League? The League has actually been heavily involved in the United Nations since its inception. It all started in 1945 when President Harry Truman invited the League to serve as a consultant to the U.S. delegation to the UN Charter Conference. The League was granted status as an official UN observer organization, which it has maintained to this day. To take a brief tangent, it is worth noting that the League's UN connection is even stronger, thanks to America's first delegate to the CSW, Dorothy Kenyon, an absolutely incredible woman and leaguer who more people need to know about. Kenyon's decades-long career of fighting for social justice and women's rights actually began with the League. She joined the New York League of Women Voters in the 1920s as a legal advisor, leading a campaign to end a state law barring women from serving on juries. Kenyon went on to do a lot of other incredible stuff in the following decades, but that will have to be a subject for another time. That was a lot of history, I know, but thankfully the League's UN story is far from finished. In fact, our role has only expanded in recent decades. In 1997, the League was granted special consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council. This status gives the League the ability to make formal, oral, or written comments to the United Nations, as well as the right to be consulted by the UN in areas in which the League has expertise. Today, our permanent delegation consists of 3 League members, 1 official observer, 2 alternates. Their role is to be our organization's eyes, ears, and voice in the functioning of the United Nations. Our current lead observer is Dr. Connie Sensor, who's also pictured on the slide. The League collaborates with other NGOs and government bodies to advocate for women's empowerment, democracy, and violence prevention, leveraging its consultative status to influence strategy and outcomes at the United Nations. The League also participates in the annual sessions of the CSW, which is what I attended this spring and what we will be discussing next. This year, it was the 68th session of the CSW. Every year, the CSW meets in its annual session, an event that brings together hundreds of representatives from governments, NGOs, and other civil society organizations, including from the League of Women Voters. The National League selects members from across the country to serve as delegates to the CSW. Delegates' principal job is to attend the numerous panels and discussions on pressing issues affecting women worldwide, presented by some of the most incredible women on the planet. I had the absolute pleasure and privilege of being one of the League's delegates this year to the 68th session from March 11th through March 22nd, and this was all took place at the UN headquarters in New York. The main theme of this year's session was accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. The programming definitely reflected this theme beautifully. The only downside was that I had to pick and choose which sessions to attend since many of them were held at the same time. I honestly had a lot of time deciding which ones to go to because they all sounded so amazing. Ultimately, I settled on, the schedule based on what was offering, ones that I thought would be really helpful in my work with the League, and also hopefully in sort of guiding a lot of the advocacy and education stuff that we do with the Chicago League as a whole. Some of the events that I went to had a wide variety of different topics, including forced marriage in the US, wartime sexual violence in the post-war feminist movement, being a woman in Palestine, the role of men in preventing gender-based violence, feminist climate justice, poverty, and environmentally sustainable systems, available protections and supportive services to fight exploitation and trafficking, achieving women's economic success through ensuring reproductive and family planning freedoms, social protection and women's lives, and poverty data, U.S. laws, and the role of CEDAW. I also attended a number of other events and programming that was held in parallel with a lot of these primary events. They included UN civil society briefings on topics ranging from negotiations, which is sort of what the U.S. is doing in anticipation of what their recommendations will be out of the conference, to sort of the youth delegation talking about their experiences of being part of the conference. There was also a really great talk hosted by the League of Women Voters of the United States on the subject of politics, power, and promoting women, strengthening institutions to improve outcomes. So I've linked in the presentation the YouTube link to watch this talk. It's also been on our social media, and we've included it in our newsletters. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it. It is a really just sort of incredible discussion, and I sort of was just blown away by everyone who spoke during it, so I can't recommend it enough. In the next few slides, I will walk through what I learned and took away from specific sessions, as well as a snapshot of the others that I attended. I don't want to take up too much of people's time this morning, so I'm not going to go in depth into every single panel and event, but I did sort of pick a couple of them to highlight more for everyone here, and I'm also available at the end of my presentation to take any questions that anyone has on any of the other events that I went to or anything that I've discussed here. All right, so the first one that I wanted to sort of highlight is a panel that I went to called True Crime: Forced Marriage in the United States. This panel was hosted by Unchained at Last, the only nonprofit in the United States focused exclusively on direct services and systems change to end forced and child marriage. The panel was moderated by Ashley Flowers of the Crime Junkie podcast. The panel was made up of American survivors of forced and child marriage. Panelists went into detail about how their lives under and eventual escapes from utterly hellish marriage conditions. The UN Sustainable Development Goals includes the call to end forced and child marriage by 2030 as part of its wider commitment to reach true gender equality globally. This panel discussion revealed just how difficult achieving that goal really is, even here in the United States. The panel revealed something that really shocked me. Between 2000 and 2018, almost 300,000 minors under the age of 18 were lawfully married in the United States. Some were as young as 10, though most were between the ages of 16 and 17. The majority of these minors were girls married to men who were 4 years or older on average. Since 2000, approximately 60,000 marriages have involved either ages or age gaps that should be deemed illegal. The panel went into detail about the severe risks that child marriage poses to young women and girls. It can often lead to forced marriages, as minors typically lack the legal rights to escape an unwanted union, and they often can't even file for divorce themselves. It represents a violation of human rights that has devastating and lifelong impacts on American girls, severely affecting their health, education, economic prospects, and overall quality of life. And it undermines statutory rape laws, frequently concealing what would otherwise be classified as a hate crime. The panelists were all incredible, true heroines who survived so much and now work to ensure that no girl has to endure what they did. Almost immediately, I was just like in tears because you often hear a lot about sort of things that happen around the world, and then when you also want to put into context like things that really are happening right here in your own backyard, it's like we're also not far removed from what is happening around us, and like the idea of wanting to be a part of the solution, especially when we talk about kind of like oppression of girls. It was really important to sort of learn a lot about what is happening with this. And there's a lot of really interesting legislation happening nationwide to sort of combat this particular issue. Um, and yeah, so that, I think it's really kind of very important to be talking about this, especially because it can be a very uncomfortable subject for a lot of people. So on to the next one. Feminist climate justice, poverty, and environmentally sustainable systems. So this panel centered on the 55 Stories of Change, a project launched at this CSW 68 and backed by the Generation Equality Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition. That is a mouthful to say. They usually sort of abbreviate to FACJ when they sort of talk about what the work that they're doing. 55 Stories of Change underscores the essential role of women and girls in addressing the climate crisis, as well as the proportionate impacts they face. The collection showcases impactful collaborative projects that demonstrate innovative solutions in various regions, focusing on feminist, climate justice, and environmentally sustainable systems. The event emphasized the critical importance of aligning gender equality with climate action, underscoring the need to empower women and girls as leaders in this domain. Panelists from various organizations shared their perspectives, revealing the power of partnerships across government, civil society, and youth organizations in driving transformative change. The FACJ Action Coalition, in its blueprint, aims to increase funding for grassroots women-led initiatives, foster women's leadership in the green economy, enhance their resilience to climate impacts, and improve data collection on gender environment. The panel was a serious call to action, highlighting for me the importance of feminist principles in achieving climate change, especially because we have such a important and active environmental action committee and arm of the work that we do with the Chicago League. Just sort of all of the gears kind of clicked into place, and it was like, yes, like we really need to be sort of making those connections between gender equality and climate justice even more so, and kind of amplify those two things in a lot of our work. The panelists urged stakeholders to prioritize the rights and representation of women and girls, bolster their access to resources, and implement a reality check on the structural issues intertwining gender and climate. They also called for more inclusive policies, equitable finance distribution, and systematic reforms, pushing for climate justice to be integrated with gender justice at all levels. Most controversially, but also intriguingly, the panel underscored the need for policy changes that incorporate feminist principles. What that means can vary widely, but is a concept that deserves further consideration. While its perspective was global, the panel also offered valuable insights for our own advocacy as the Chicago League. For example, the panel showcased the power of collaboration across stakeholders, something we've been doing for a long time. Our ongoing efforts to build new and strengthening existing alliances with other civil society and environmentally focused organizations will only extend the reach and impact of our initiatives, such as reducing single-use plastics, advancing clean energy solutions, and implementing eco-friendly waste management systems. The panel also emphasized how crucial education is to drive climate action. Our Environmental Action Committee, led by Claudia Jackson and Julia Utzet, is already advocating for environmental justice and sustainability across Chicago and doing amazing work to educate voters. But we can still do more as a league to deepen its commitment to educating our members and the public about sustainable practices. Then this panel was Boys Don't Cry, the role of men in preventing gender-based violence. This panel gathered distinguished speakers, including representatives from national government, civil society, and international organizations, to address the pervasive issue of gender-based violence. The event focused on comprehensive solutions to prevent gender-based violence through engagement of men and the development of boys and youth. And for me, this was also deeply personal as someone who has a young son. I want to also help him be part of the change of, just being a good man in the world and standing up for what's right. So this also kind of worked very well with sort of my goals as a mother in life. The panel underscored the need to address and challenge traditional masculine norms that perpetuate gender-based violence. These norms often encourage dominance, aggression, and emotional suppression, which can lead to violence. To counteract these patterns, the speakers emphasized the importance of creating environments where boys can develop healthy without exposure to violence and harmful stereotypes. The panelists were not only informative, but they also offered a number of policy recommendations to address gender-based violence globally, programmatically through investment in prevention programs and support services, including direct prevention programs to promote gender equality, challenge harmful norms, and provide safe, violent-free environments for children. Secondary prevention programs to identify direct individuals at risk and provide early intervention, especially for those who have already been exposed to violence. And other programs to support survivors of gender-based violence, such as offering economic support, legal assistance, and mental health services, which also address the root causes of violence in men. The discussion highlighted the urgent need for systematic change and the role that men can play in challenging these harmful norms. Panelists called for increased collaboration between national governments and civil society to implement impactful programs that can create a culture of nonviolence and equity. They also emphasized the importance of engaging men in these initiatives and encouraging them to take active roles in ending gender-based violence. As a mother of a young son, I think every day about how I can help him grow up to respect women and always pursue peaceful paths to resolve conflicts. I think we can all benefit from thinking more about how we can ensure boys become good men. That's ultimately the only way to end gender-based violence for good. Now to kind of switch gears into sort of more about my experience of being a delegate for this. I think above all, like the sessions and discussions were just incredibly eye-opening to be in sort of these rooms with such inspiring and strong leaders across all genders, across, all races and nationalities was just, it's a really kind of a very special place, and only in this sort of very particular environment like the United Nations, do you really get to sort of experience these things? I think in general, from understanding the urgent need to combat forced marriage to recognizing the integral role of climate justice and the necessity to involve men in preventing gender-based violence, I was able to gain invaluable insights that have shaped my perspective on our work with the League. However, while the formal programming and panel events were the central feature of CSW 68, it was far more than just 10 days of like nonstop education and lots of really intense conversation. Uh, I can't sort of emphasize enough what an incredible opportunity it was to represent our organization on the world stage, even though, I'm kind of just like one tiny speck in the scheme of it all. It was an honor and a privilege that I will absolutely cherish forever, and I would encourage any League member that's sort of interested in participating to definitely apply. This is an annual conference, and it would be great to sort of see more Chicago representation at the event. Ultimately, I came away from CSW 68 energized and determined to continue the hard work that has, over the course of generations, brought our world, our country, and our community even closer to the realization of true equality. I'll also sort of say, to kind of wrap up, that I think my biggest takeaways, what we do with our league and what we do with the league in general is very hyper local. And that's really where the power of change starts to happen. And what every single event, every single conversation I had around this conference highlighted for me is it's like change happens on the local level. Like we are the people that are actively bringing about change in the world, and that the local change starts to sort of build up, and that's where you kind of get the big sweeping reforms that we want to see more governments make and things like that. But we can't sort of get those big changes if we don't start at the grassroots level. And I, hope that I can, as president, also be able to inspire all of you as Chicago members and beyond of how important the work you're doing with the league in this local sense truly is to be making change, not just here in Chicago, but worldwide. And so with that, like I will I will stop talking and open it up if anyone has any questions, comments, or anything you'd like to kind of ask me about the experience. I know it was a bit of a dense presentation, and I was trying to get a lot in a very short period of time, but I'd love to sort of, open it up if anyone has any questions for me.
Well, I'd like to start with a question, Jane, and I've got comments later, but kind of what surprised you the most?
I think what surprised me the most was uh I kind of how much I felt like I could sort of make a difference, or that, you kind of feel like, oh, you're in these rooms with ambassadors and diplomats and government leaders and people from the United Nations, and you're in these things, and I'm like, who am I? I'm just like, I'm just part of the League of Women Voters of Chicago. But in the rooms and at the conference, like there really is no hierarchy in that way. We are all people who are actively trying to learn from each other, actively trying to make positive change in the world. In this instance, it was very much about, pursuing gender equality and how can we all kind of come together, learn from each other, and then bring those experiences back to that individual work that we do. So I think, and maybe it's also because I'm a New Yorker that I'm very self-deprecating, but like I went there and they're being like, oh, I'm nobody. And I came out there feeling like, oh, I am somebody, and I am making the world a better place in the small ways that I can. All right, Joyce, you had your hand up?
Yes, I would like to know about the other delegates. They were not all from leagues, were they? And if not, what other organizations were represented at the conference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there were so there are certain organizations across civil society experiences that have this sort of special designation with the United Nations. And basically that means like we have, or these organizations have clearance to participate in these sorts of events, be on the UN premises, be in that. So the League has had that designation since the beginning. There were League League volunteers from across the nation that participated in this, from California to New York to Chicago to, all over, which was really nice to see. I know it's not the easiest for just anyone to kind of hop on a plane and go to the United Nations for 2 weeks. So it was nice to see diversity amongst the League delegation as a whole. But to sort of get back to sort of how many other orgs there were, we get, based on sort of our designation, we get a certain number of slots that we're able to fill with delegates, and so other organizations do as well. So it's sort of at the organization's discretion how they want to fill those slots with who they want to send. And the different organizations, they ran the gamut from like religious groups to health and wellness to, all kinds of different activism projects. And the purpose was just for all of us to kind of learn from each other in that way. It was kind of very interesting to hear from sort of a lot of other global groups that do similar work that we do around voting and stuff, because you really just kind of like, oh my goodness, it's really very different everywhere. So I hope that kind of answered your question. I don't have the exact number for how many delegates over 2 weeks.
No, I was just interested in
Now,
the types of people that were invited. Did you have any really fun social activities planned?
well, we did do some like kind of league networking events, which was really nice to kind of just get to know people. And it was very much encouraged, like in between events, for us as league delegates to let each other know what we were going to. So if we were going to the same events, we can kind of hang out together, or just so we can kind of cover a wide spectrum of different topics, because we all kind of have, our own interests going into it. And I mean, there's hundreds of events over the course of 2 weeks to have to choose from.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was amazed at your quote about the number of forced marriages in the US. Can you elaborate at all on that?
Yeah, so I was amazed too, because it's just like you sort of hear about these things in other places, and there's a wide spectrum of why it kind of happens, and a lot of it does have to do with sort of the there's a lot of religious stuff or a lot of political reasons that women's sort of education and autonomy is not respected in other places. In the US, you do find that a lot of these stats come out of for religious reasons. There are many different religious denominations in the United States that, based on their practices, might adhere to things like this. I personally believe that, even if you're 16 or 17, you're still a child, and you shouldn't be sort of forced into a marriage situation for whatever the reason is until you're sort of an adult. And that's why it was, really hard for me to hear some of these stats of how prevalent this is. I will say that there's every state kind of handles it differently. So there's no like federal laws going on about this. This is really sort of in the state's hands. Have been some bills floating around Illinois, because we have not banned child marriage here in Illinois. I can sort of send anyone information about that as follow-up, but even sort of a lot of the states that you would think would have better protections around this sort of thing don't actively have that. I think that it's something like there's only maybe like 7 states that have banned child marriage just in total. So yeah, that there was a lot of sort of really interesting stats where it's like, oh yes, this is actually happening here as well.
Thank you.
I have a question. How does what you went to was a lot of nations and countries. So how do you dovetail with what the league is doing, which is to educate, to be supportive of women's rights, I'm thinking, and just like the marriage, the gender violence, things like that, because that kind of deviates from voting, doesn't it? Or how do you dovetail that? Because what also I'm wondering, if these are a lot of nations, and this is going a different direction than what I'm asking, I don't know if culture was brought into it, because like you were presenting earlier, there is culture involved.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great question and something that I definitely grapple with in sort of thinking about too. I think above all, or the way that I kind of look at that idea is, yeah, we are all kind of members of a global society too. And while it might feel like we kind of operate in our own little bubbles of society, what happens here impacts what happens in other countries and vice versa. Actually, while I was at the convention, the news sort of broke that one of the countries in Africa, they had previously outlawed genital mutilation, and the government switched and new people were elected, and now they just said that that's completely okay again. So they just reversed a ban on that. And it sort of, for a lot of people, they were very upset at hearing that news. And it's like, that to me, the connection can be very much made to what has happened in our country around a lot of protections for women's reproductive rights that we've been seeing over many years, where it's like, that's happening here, but here in Africa, they're seeing something, a rollback of protections against genital mutilation. And so it's like, we are all connected in all of the work that we do, and we have to very much look out and protect each other. Like, we are all people on this planet trying to make life better and things work. And I think that that's where, to get back to Andrea, what you were saying about how does this connect to voting, I think it's so inherently connected to participation and the political process, where it's like we have people here hurting in our own communities here in the United States, and it's like, how do we achieve the change to make people's lives here better? And it's through political participation, it's through holding our elected officials accountable, it's through ensuring that people understand the political process, the voting process, how to participate, because our elected officials work for us. It's, they're not free to act independently. Like, we hold them accountable as citizens in the United States. And, I think that there's a lot that people working in similar grassroots situations that we do in our work of civic participation here in Chicago, talking to people in the Czech Republic or talking to people in sort of any of the Scandinavian countries about these sorts of, like, how do you get more people activated into the work that you're doing? And those sorts of conversations is really just sort of so valuable to the work that we do, because we there's so much we can learn from each other in order for us all to kind of achieve the goals that we want in the work that we do. So I don't know if that like fully answered your question, but that was just me kind of rambling a little bit about.
I just want to make one last comment, then I'll shut up. I have young people in my family in their 30s. They didn't vote, and these are women. and it's because I'm older. I have to give them a history. So my question and recommendation is we need to, right before election, go on the Tribune and the league needs to write a huge spiel about women, how we got the right to vote, because women, these young women, don't seem to be, I'll vote if I want to. What's the point, and all that. They go through this. So, as an older person listening to these younger people in my family, these women don't get it. They don't understand how hard it's been for women to be where they're at today.
Yeah, I was a side note, I don't know if you've heard of the new musical Suffs that just opened on Broadway about like the suffrage movement. Hillary Clinton was one of the producers. I was recently in New York and I went to see it, and I was like sitting there sobbing like basically the entire musical, and I was not expecting to have that emotional reaction. And I was in sort of a theater with a lot of people, and I felt like I was the only one sobbing. I don't know how, but I very much was like, is it because of sort of just how connected I am to the work and the history and the legacy of what's happening? Like, I was so concerned with what other people in the audience were like thinking and feeling about learning this history and learning how much more work we still have to go. I feel like now once a day, the past couple of months, like I've had conversations with people who don't understand that like the ERA has not been passed. That it's sort of just sitting there, and there's a lot of disagreement on next steps to it. And I know that the National like League of Women Voters, this is one of their big sort of campaigns going into this year, is sort of a lot of education and advocacy around, we need to get this passed. But a lot of people, especially in my age group and younger, are just like, they either think that it's already been passed or they've never heard of it or any of those sorts of things. And it's like, no, legislation and things can change so quickly because democracy is precious. Democracy is a living, breathing creature that we all have to like take care of and nourish. And often, unfortunately, it becomes, until someone feels like they're directly being affected by something, that's often how they jump into getting involved or caring about a particular issue. And or feeling like they have the ability to make the changes that they want to see in the world. I try to sort of in our work, and I know, a lot of our members really try to sort of get people to sort of see the power in those small little things that over time add up to very big changes that we all want to see. And a lot of people just want like the quick fix.
Yeah.
Things like that. It takes time and it takes a lot to participate, and like our tagline for the league is making democracy work. And there's a lot of big things that need to be done to make democracy work, but there's a lot of really small things about participation, about transparency, about reforms that we can all be a part of. And over time, those small things become the big changes we want to see. So it's kind of like the difference between running a sprint and a marathon. And I know a lot of young people have the mentality that they want things to happen very quickly and get frustrated when they don't. And yeah, I'm just gonna be doing whatever I can. And, I hope everyone on this call and beyond, we all kind of can do whatever we can to get more people to participate.
Thank you.
Sharon, you had your hand up?
Yeah. One of the things that I just found so exciting about this when you were talking, and I don't know if any of these groups are there, but it kind of builds on what you were talking about, Andrea, and what you were saying too about what it really takes to have kind of an expansive democracy that includes everyone. And I attended a conference this fall. It was the American Association of Colleges and Universities. And what was so powerful about this, it was, presidents and provosts and things, and they were admitting that in the United States, the state of our democracy shows we have absolutely failed in civics education. We wouldn't be in the state that we are now. And what I liked is rather than focusing on the failure, they looked at what could make a difference. And the things that they focused, that they found really made a difference, is not just teaching the basics of civics and the history, but this really relates to the environmental justice and empowering women. Getting, okay, two things. Students involved in some kind of community service engagement work their very first year. And quite often those were environmental things. It's retrofitting buildings, it's urban gardens, it's community gardens. And that students doing that, they learn a kind of sense of democratic reasoning and a sense of being part of a whole, the thing that you were mentioned, that they have power, they want to be something bigger. And then, so like if you're immersed in your community and getting a sense that you can make a difference, and then, like they said, in every single class, not just political science, but it's like in the arts and chemistry and biology, you teach if we want to have a deliberative democracy and not a competitive democracy. A deliberative democracy where you really learn and grow, rather than a competitive where you go in just to win and force your way. You teach the processes of democratic collective reasoning in every single class. And that kind of thing empowers women and girls. And I just think of one last example. One last example, then a question for you. The last example is a conference that I attended. It was a Social Enterprise World Forum. And they were describing, and this is about how, and again, it relates to empowering women. It was like in elementary school, and I think it's about 4th through 6th grade. They interviewed like boys and girls if they thought that when they grew up, they wanted to run a business. And most of the boys did, and most of the girls didn't. And they give them a progress though to design an environmentally, socially just, responsible business venture, whether it's like upcycling or going. And after the year of that, now this shows the majority of girls wanted to run a business. They saw it as something that, I mean, they could, and so business didn't have to be this competitive, cutthroat, beat other people. It can be really working together. And so to change our educational system from the beginning, where we really teach that. And so the last question, I was wondering in terms of the groups that attend, the groups that I know that are really working on justice for women, environmental justice, economics, were they represented there as well? Groups like Project Drawdown or the B Corporations or Social Enterprise World Forum?
Yeah, so I don't know, sort of, I can try to look and sort of see if I can find like a more complete list of who was there and who was participating. There's kind of sort of two sections of the conference. There's kind of sort of there's sort of a UN section of it, and then sort of there's a group called NGO CSW that also hosts events. So there's also people who don't have delegate status who also can kind of mix and mingle in some of the stuff. So I don't know if they have like a definitive list of everyone who participated. I could definitely look at that. But there was, a lot of, if anything, it was really nice to see in terms of groups that participated, how many governments had representatives there. Like, I think that there is sort of a lot of a disconnect between governments and civil society and kind of how they work together, and to have governments sort of come in and say, like, we want to learn from the civil society sector, we want to help be a part of the change. And in some cases, it's really nice to also hear that there are governments that are allocating billions of dollars towards gender equality initiatives in their countries. I would love to see that here. But we're a little bit cash strapped in certain ways on certain things. But it's nice that other countries can find money just for gender equality projects. And for them to sort of get excited about talking about those sorts of things is really cool. All right. Well,
like just another one, Jane. Because I'm just so excited about seeing.
I love the way your brain works, Sharon. So I'm always down to talk about these sorts of things. Yeah, feel free. Let's.
For example, I just wish like the media getting things out. Like there's a whole movement that's called Toward the Regenerative City. And regenerative city. And this is, again, it's realizing doing this, having a circular economy. Of course, you empower women and girls. I mean, all of the overlaps, and we're part of such a major, it's so weird, cultural change, because regenerative cities, it's like it's environmentally just, it takes into gender justice, and it requires a completely different type of reasoning where it's not short-term thinking, possession, control, mastery. This is difficult. You've got to learn from each other. You bring in different perspectives. I mean, it's the basic, I remember as a young feminist, the basic difference in some of the feminist theorists, and maybe some of you here, and this is one of the things that happens getting older. I can't remember who is the feminist philosopher who talked about this difference. I think it was in the 70s and early 80s, the difference between power with rather than power over. And at the core of feminism and the way our vision of democracy, it's power with rather than power over. And what it means to teach that, expand that, practice it, and also experience for people who've been conditioned into the power over, the kind of traditional masculinity, that there's a real joy in power with. There's a freedom to learn from failure rather than a shame. And it's there's a joy of improvisation and growing. It's exciting to see. And again, one last thing, and then I'll stop. There's Paul Hawken. He's the guy who's the founder of Project Drawdown. He's saying really, like in terms of this kind of shift, we're in something that's as big as the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it's a huge mindset shift. And it really doesn't get covered enough, and how all of these pieces relate. We get the kind of Shark Tank negative reality TV shows rather than these powerful stories of people all over the world.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And that's why I'm so excited that you're a league member, Sharon, and you could bring, you can help me sort of bring a lot of these things forward into the mission work that we do with the league. I will say that, also, and I kind of didn't talk a lot about this in my talk because I'm going to be bringing in one of the California League of Women Voters members who's much more of an expert on it than I am. But we're gonna be, as in my desire to bring more of this sort of conversation into the work that we do with the Chicago League, I'm going to have her sort of speak more about CEDAW, which is a huge sort of initiative that the United Nations has put forth. It's the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and its abbreviation is CEDAW, CEDAW. And so it was adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly. And it's kind of the International Bill of Rights of Women and protections against discrimination. It is currently sitting in, the US has not adopted it. We are one of the member states who is not. So there's a lot of politics about that whole process, but there's a lot in terms of sort of the implementation and bringing forth the principles of CEDAW that we can be doing on the local level, on the state level, outside of kind of federal government push. So I'm excited to sort of see, or for our members to kind of learn how we can do that. So that's going to be, a later programming thing. But I mean, this event, like all 2 weeks, it was all about CEDAW, and I'm very riled up about it. So I'm excited to host that follow-up event on that. Are there any kind of like last minute questions or comments? I'm no problem like stopping the recording and staying on to sort of answer or keep the conversation going if anyone is interested. But thank you so much for joining me this morning to kind of learn about it, and I hope that it was interesting and informative for you. So thank you so much, and the recording and the presentation will be made available to members, so feel free to also share it. And thank you so much.